welcome to a quiet, comforting space. Tonight, we are going to embark on a long, slow journey through the deep and fascinating history of one of the world's most enduring storytellers. We will travel through time, step by step, era by era, tracing a path that begins with a 16-year-old girl holding an acoustic guitar and leads all the way to the grand, glittering stage of her ultimate evolution. Let your breathing slow down. Inhale deeply, feeling the cool air fill your lungs. Exhale completely, letting go of any tension from the day. Allow the rhythm of these words to drift into your thoughts as we explore the rich, detailed tapestry of a remarkable life and career. Tonight, we immerse ourselves entirely in the foundational chapter of this journey, a period of sweet country melodies, acoustic guitars, and the innocence of a young girl discovering her voice. Our story begins in the mid-2000s, in the quiet, green hills of Pennsylvania, long before the stadium lights, the flashing cameras, and the global headlines. A young Taylor Swift grew up on an 11-acre Christmas tree farm in Reading, Pennsylvania. This unique setting, surrounded by rows of pine trees and the changing of the seasons, fostered a deep imagination and a love for nostalgic storytelling from a very early age. She would spend hours wandering the property, creating stories in her mind, and finding rhythm in the natural world around her. She felt deeply drawn to the magic of language, realizing early on that she could channel her everyday emotions, her observations of the world, and her quiet anxieties into poetry and prose. When she was just a preteen, a pivotal moment occurred that altered the course of her life forever. A local computer repairman came to her house to fix her family's computer, and noticing an old acoustic guitar sitting in the corner, he offered to teach her a few basic chords. Those few simple chords opened a massive, magical door to an entirely new universe. She practiced until her fingers were blistered and calloused, realizing that she could combine her poetry with musical notes. She began writing songs relentlessly, filling countless spiral notebooks with lyrics about the triumphs and tribulations of middle school life, the dynamics of school friendships, and the quiet, heavy aches of growing up. For Taylor, songwriting was not just a hobby. It was a survival mechanism, a way to process a world that often felt overwhelming, driven by an absolute, unwavering certainty in her calling. A 14-year-old Taylor convinced her parents to dismantle their comfortable, established life in Pennsylvania and relocate to the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee. She knew that Nashville was the ultimate destination, the absolute heart of the songwriting universe, and she wanted to be exactly where the music was being born. After settling into their new home in Hendersonville, she began a tireless routine. She would walk up and down Music Row with her mother, hand-delivering her early demo tapes to the receptionist desks at various record labels. Hoping someone would take the time to listen to a young teenager with a dream, while many established labels passed on her, viewing her as too young or too niche. Her undeniable lyrical talent could not be ignored for long. She soon became the youngest staff songwriter ever signed by the prestigious Sony ATV publishing house. This was a monumental achievement for a teenager, as it placed her in writing rooms with seasoned industry veterans who had been crafting hits for decades. Taylor held her own in those rooms, refusing to let older writers dictate her voice. She insisted on writing about her real, authentic teenage experiences, crafting stories that were wise beyond her years, yet completely relatable to peers her own age. Her life changed forever during a routine showcase performance at the famous Bluebird Cafe, a small, legendary, and intimate venue in Nashville, where songwriters gathered to bare their souls in front of quiet audiences. Sitting in the audience that particular night was Scott Borchetta, a high-profile music executive who was in the middle of preparing to launch a risky, independent startup label called Big Machine Records. He saw an unmistakable spark in the young girl's performance, a raw, unfiltered authenticity that could not be manufactured by a major label marketing team. Even though the label didn't fully exist yet and had no infrastructure, Taylor chose to trust him, preferring to be the absolute priority at a tiny, ambitious company rather than a forgotten name on a crowded roster at a major corporation. It was a massive gamble for a teenager, but it proved that she possessed a fierce, independent streak and an unwavering trust in her own artistic instincts. In October of 2006, her self-titled debut album was officially released to the world. The cover featured a young Taylor surrounded by water, her signature blonde curls falling wildly around her face, wearing bohemian dresses and cowboy boots. This debut record eventually became a historic success, cementing itself as the longest charting album of the 2000s decade on the Billboard 200 chart. Taylor wrote or co-wrote every single track on the album, drawing heavily from her real-life experiences during her freshman year of high school. She fought incredibly hard to work with Nathan Chapman, a producer who had only recorded her early, raw demos in a small, cramped backyard shed. The record label initially wanted to pair her with more established, legendary Nashville producers, but Taylor insisted that Chapman understood her organic vision perfectly. This partnership laid the groundwork for a signature sound that blended traditional country instruments like the fiddle, banjo, and mandolin with irresistible, radio-friendly pop sensibilities. The singles from this debut album began to steadily and surely capture the hearts of listeners across the country. The very first single, Tim McGraw, was conceived during a high school math class when Taylor was only 15 years old. She was dating a boy who was about to graduate and leave for college, and she knew with absolute certainty that their relationship had an inevitable expiration date. She began humming a bittersweet melody in her head during class and wrote the entire song in just 20 minutes on a piano after school, hoping that whenever he eventually heard the music of Tim McGraw, he would think of her and the sweet moments they shared. The song was a quiet, acoustic masterpiece that showcased her unique ability to use specific, mundane details, like an old faded blue jeans jacket, a porch light, and a favorite dress, to evoke universal feelings of young love, transition, and deep nostalgia. Following the incredible, unexpected success of her first single, Teardrops on My Guitar exposed an even more vulnerable, raw side of the young artist. The song was entirely inspired by a real-life high school classmate named Drew, a boy who sat next to her every single day in class. Drew would endlessly and enthusiastically talk about another girl he was desperately in love with, completely blind to Taylor's quiet, aching affection for him. She sang about going home, turning off the bedroom lights, and letting the tears fall, perfectly capturing the exact, acute ache of unrequited teenage love. The raw, unvarnished honesty of the track resonated deeply with millions of young fans worldwide who felt completely seen and understood by this new, relatable voice in music, transforming her from a local Nashville secret into a rising national star. As her star continued to rise into the musical sky, tracks like Our Song and Picture to Burn revealed her fiery wit, her sharp tongue, and her playful, confident energy. Our Song was originally written for her 9th grade high school talent show, composed simply because she noticed she didn't have a specific song that she and her current boyfriend considered their own. She wrote it with a bouncy, rhythmic, and conversational cadence, using the imagery of a slamming screen door, a sneaking out late at night, and a tapping phone line to construct a beautiful, makeshift anthem. The song became a massive, runaway hit, making her the absolute youngest soul writer and singer of a #1 country chart track in history. She spent her days attending regular high school classes, trying to maintain a normal life, and her weekends opening for country music legends like Brad Paisley and Rascal Flatts. Slowly but surely building a fiercely loyal, dedicated community of fans who connected with her authenticity. Every track on the debut album offered a window into the mind of a young girl navigating a rapidly changing world. Cold, as you showcased her astonishingly mature lyrical capabilities, widely considered by fans to be one of her earliest lyrical masterpieces. In it, she described a cold, emotionally unavailable partner with a level of poetic sophistication that stunned critics, using complex metaphors about gray skis and hollow walls. Tied together with a smile was written about one of her high school friends, a beautiful girl who seemed to have everything perfect on the outside, but was secretly struggling with a severe eating disorder and deep insecurities on the inside. Taylor wrote the song to show compassion, proving that her songwriting could extend far beyond her own personal heartbreaks to mirror the secret pain of those around her. The debut era was also characterized by a relentless, grassroots work ethic that would define her career for decades to come. Taylor understood that her fans were her greatest asset, She spent hours after her early shows signing autographs, taking photos, and writing back to fans on early social media platforms like MySpace. She would stand in line for up to 8 hours at a time during meet and greets, making sure every single person left with a personal connection. This deep, unbreakable bond was forged in the small country fairs and festival stages of the debut era, creating a foundation of loyalty that would support her through every radical genre shift and public storm in her future. The musical landscape of this first era was filled with the warm, comforting sounds of acoustic strumming, the bright chime of a 12-string guitar, and the soulful crying of a steel guitar. It was a time of innocence, a time when her songs were filled with references to small towns, high school hallways, pickup trucks, and wishing on wishing stars. It was the beautiful, unhurried beginning of a legacy, a moment frozen in time before the global pop anthems and the massive stadium productions. Let the acoustic plucking of those early years soothe your mind. Picture the quiet green hills of Tennessee, the small stages lit by warm lights, and the pure joy of a young girl singing her heart out with nothing but a guitar and a story to tell. Breathe in slowly, feeling the calm wash over you. Breathe out completely, letting your thoughts rest deeply in the quiet, gentle beginnings of this long and magnificent journey. Let the melody drift, let the rhythm slow, and allow yourself to sink deeper into a peaceful, undisturbed rest. We step into the year 2010, arriving at the monumental and fiercely independent era of Speak Now. To understand the birth of this era, we must understand the heavy weight of the world that rested on a young artist's shoulders at the time. In early 2010, Taylor had made global history by becoming the youngest artist ever to win the prestigious Grammy Award for Album of the Year for her second record, Fearless. She was just 20 years old, achieving a milestone that most musicians spend a lifetime chasing. Yet, despite this monumental validation, a loud wave of skepticism and harsh criticism began to swirl around her in the music industry. Critics openly questioned her true talent, suggesting that her success was merely the byproduct of a powerful corporate machine, clever marketing, and a heavy reliance on older, seasoned male co-writers. They claimed a young woman could not possibly be the true, primary architect behind such brilliant, emotionally resonant lyricism. Deeply hurt, but intensely motivated by these unfair doubts, Taylor made a courageous, high-stakes creative decision that would alter the trajectory of her career and solidify her legacy as a master songwriter. She decided that, for her third studio album, she would write every single song entirely by herself. There would be no co-writers in the room, no collaborative safety nets, and no external voices helping her construct the melodies or the lyrics. Over the course of 2 exhausting, intensive years, spent traveling the globe on tour buses, navigating airplanes, and resting in quiet hotel rooms, she poured her soul into her notebook. Speak Now became the ultimate creative declaration of independence. It was a bold, unfiltered response to her critics, proving to the entire world that her voice was entirely, uniquely, and powerfully her own. The underlying concept of Speak Now was deeply poetic and personal. Taylor envisioned the album as a collection of open, unread letters written directly to the specific people who had impacted her life over the previous 2 years. Each track represented the exact, honest words she desperately wished she had spoken to someone in a crucial moment, but kept locked away inside due to fear, timing, or societal pressure. The title itself served as a grand metaphor for that exact, fleeting second where it is almost too late, and you must either courageously stand up and say what you are truly feeling, or deal with the silent consequences forever. Musically, the album marked a massive, sweeping expansion of her sound, beautifully blending her country pop foundation with heavy alternative rock elements, dramatic orchestral strings, power pop choruses, and soaring electric guitar riffs that demanded to be heard. When the album was officially released on October 25, 2010, it became an immediate, record-breaking commercial juggernaut. Speak Now debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart, selling over 1 million copies in its very first week of release in the United States alone. This rare feat made it only the 16th album in music history to achieve such an explosive opening week, an astonishing accomplishment for a self-written project. The album would go on to become the best-selling entirely self-written album in the history of music. Furthermore, Taylor earned an official entry into the Guinness World Records after 10 distinct tracks from the album debuted on the Billboard Hot 100 chart simultaneously, making her the first female artist in history to achieve such a massive chart monopoly. The creative process behind the scenes was intensely intimate. Much of the album was scribbled down by hand in a specific diary that had been gifted to Taylor by the actress Kate Walsh. Taylor, a massive fan of television dramas, used this journal to document her transition from late adolescence into early adulthood, navigating the complex maze of intense public scrutiny, high-profile relationships, and personal heartbreaks to ensure the album maintained a perfect, organic coherence. She would play her raw, unproduced acoustic drafts directly to her family, her close friends, and her trusted producer, Nathan Chapman. Originally, Taylor had chosen Enchanted as the working title for the entire album. However, Scott Borchetta, the founder of her record label, gently advised her to seek a different, more mature title, feeling that Enchanted was a bit too fairytale-centric for the deeply introspective, direct, and sometimes confrontational themes of the new songs. The title track, Speak Now, beautifully captured her enduring love for whimsical, narrative-driven storytelling. The song was entirely inspired by a close childhood friend of hers who had confessed that the boy she loved was about to marry a cold, manipulative, and deeply unpleasant woman who had completely isolated him from his true friends and family. Taylor immediately joked that her friend should go and disrupt the formal wedding ceremony during the traditional preacher's call to speak now or forever hold your peace. That playful, rebellious thought blossomed into a charming, cinematic song about breaking into a high society wedding, hiding quietly within the curtains, and standing up in front of the horrified congregation to reclaim a lost love just before the vows are finalized. In beautiful contrast to the playfulness of the title track, Enchanted emerged as a sweeping 6-minute symphonic rock masterpiece of romantic confession. The song was written after a brief, deeply memorable encounter in New York City with Adam Young, the lead singer of the electronic pop project Owl City. After returning home from the meeting, Taylor realized she was completely captivated, yet terrified that her intense romantic feelings were entirely one-sided. The track builds with an exquisite, slow patience, layering acoustic guitars and gentle whispers until it reaches a desperate, soaring, and explosive bridge where she begs the person not to be in love with someone else. To ensure he knew the song was written for him, she cleverly hid the word wonderstruck, a specific word he had used in an email to her after their meeting, within the lyrics, and spelled out his name in the hidden capital letters of the album's lyric booklet. One of the most emotionally devastating and critically acclaimed pillars of the era was Dear John, a track that would establish her legendary reputation for writing deeply poignant, vulnerable fifth tracks on her albums. Clocking in at nearly 7 minutes long, Dear John was a slow, blues-infused country rock ballad that functioned as a raw, unfiltered post-mortem of a toxic, emotionally manipulative relationship with an older man. The lyrics confronted the painful reality of being a 19-year-old girl navigating the dark, shifting goalposts of an unstable partner, using brilliant, sharp imagery of painting blue skies gray. The musical production masterfully incorporated crying blues guitars that directly mirrored the musical style of the song's subject, creating a haunting, unforgettable atmosphere of heartbreak and survival. The era also featured moments of profound grace and forgiveness, most notably within the quiet track Innocent. This song was written in the intense aftermath of the 2009 MTV Video Music Awards, where a prominent male rapper had publicly interrupted her acceptance speech on global television, sparking a massive media storm. Instead of reacting with anger or bitterness, a 19-year-old Taylor retreated to her guitar and penned a gentle, empathetic lullaby dedicated to her detractor. The song explored the fragile reality of being a grown adult who has lost their way, gently reminding him that 32 is still young enough to grow up, and that a single dark mistake does not permanently define a person's soul. It was a masterclass in emotional maturity that stunned listeners with its quiet compassion, in stark contrast to the gentleness of Innocent. Mean emerged as a sharp, banjo-led bluegrass anthem aimed directly at a specific, overly cruel music critic who had repeatedly attacked her vocal performances and questioned her right to exist in the music industry. The song became an instant classic, capturing the universal experience of dealing with a bully, whether in the high school cafeteria or on a professional public stage. Taylor sang about working hard, finding her own path, and eventually living in a big, beautiful city, while the bully remained small, bitter, and mean. The track resonated deeply with fans worldwide and went on to win 2 prestigious Grammy Awards for Best Country Song and Best Country Solo Performance, a triumphant validation of her growth as a live performer. The emotional depth of the era was further anchored by tracks like Back to December and Last Kiss. Back to December marked the very first time in her career that Taylor wrote a song as a direct, public apology to someone she had wronged in a relationship. Written for the actor Taylor Lautner, the song was a beautiful, melancholic ballad filled with lush strings, capturing the heavy, lingering regret of realizing you beautiful threw away a perfect, gentle love because you were too guarded to appreciate it at the time. Last Kiss, another devastatingly beautiful track, was a slow-burning exploration of the quiet, empty spaces left behind after a sudden breakup. A beautiful, subtle detail within the track is its instrumental introduction, which lasts for exactly 27 seconds, the precise length of the infamous phone call during which her previous partner had broken up with her. The Speak Now era culminated in the grand, spectacular scale of the Speak Now World Tour, which ran from February of 2011 to March of 2012, playing to millions of ecstatic fans across Asia, Europe, and North America, and grossing over $123 million. On stage, Taylor brought her self-written world to life like a massive, multi-million-dollar Broadway production. The stage was framed by grand, classical architecture, vintage bridges, and sweeping velvet curtains. With her signature curly blonde hair falling past her shoulders, she performed in glittering purple dresses, writing the number 13 on her hand before every show and scrawling poetic lyrics down her left arm that changed every single night. During the performances, real snow would fall gently from the stadium ceilings during Back to December. Acrobats would dangle from the rafters during the dark, gothic rock track Haunted. And a massive, real brass wedding bell would descend from above during the climax of Speak Now, which Taylor would strike with a giant mallet to the roaring cheers of the crowd. The closing track of the standard album, Long Live, became the emotional, triumphant anthem of the entire tour. It was written as a grand, soaring love letter to her bandmates and her dedicated fans, celebrating the surreal, magical moments they had shared, while conquering the music world together against all odds, urging them to forever remember the magic they created in those crowded rooms. Breathe in slowly now, letting the majestic, theatrical purple lights of the Speak Now era fade softly into the background of your mind. Feel the cool, quiet peace of the evening wash over you, just like the falling snow on that grand stadium stage. We step into the autumn of 2008, arriving at the dawn of the monumental Fearless era. truly understand this era, we have to look at the sheer velocity of what was happening in the life of an 18-year-old Taylor Swift. Her debut album had established her as a rising country star, but Fearless was the explosive catalyst that transformed her into a mainstream global phenomenon. Released on November 11, 2008, Fearless did not just top the charts. It became an absolute cultural touchstone for a generation. It went on to become the most awarded album in the history of country music, sweeping the American Music Awards, the Country Music Association Awards, and the Academy of Country Music Awards. The ultimate validation came at the 52nd Annual Grammy Awards, where Fearless secured the prestigious Album of the Year trophy, making Taylor the youngest solo artist in music history at that time to receive the industry's highest honor. With Fearless, Taylor officially stepped into the role of a co-producer, taking a firmer, more confident grip on the reins of her own musical identity, alongside producer Nathan Chapman. While her debut album was written from the perspective of an outsider looking in, Fearless was written from the absolute center of the storm. The album explored the magical, terrifying, and dizzying world of being a teenager, navigating the complex maze of high school hallways, the intense rush of first dates, and the inevitable sting of fairy tales falling apart. Taylor described the title track and the concept of the album not as the absence of fear, but as having fears and doubts, but jumping anyway. It was about loving fiercely despite the knowledge that it could all end in heartbreak. The leading catalyst for this global explosion was the timeless anthem Love Story. The song was born on Taylor's bedroom floor in less than an hour after her parents had expressed strong, vocal disapproval of a boy she was interested in seeing. Feeling a deep sense of teenage injustice, she retreated to her room, locked the door, and related her personal situation to the classic literary tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. However, being an inherent optimist who refused to accept a tragic ending, she chose to rewrite the narrative, crafting a triumphant climax where the prince saves the princess and asks for her father's blessing. The song's soaring, cinematic key change during the final chorus became legendary, effortlessly crossing genre boundaries to dominate both country and mainstream pop charts worldwide, proving that her songwriting possessed a universal, global appeal. Another massive pillar of this era was You Belong With Me, a song born after Taylor overheard a male friend arguing on the phone with his current girlfriend, who was yelling and treating him poorly. She immediately felt a profound wave of empathy and began crafting a storyline about the classic, relatable girl next door who understands a boy in a way his glamorous, popular girlfriend never could. The accompanying music video, where Taylor played both the nerdy, bespectacled protagonist writing notes on paper and the cruel, dark-haired cheerleader antagonist, became an instant pop culture classic. It won the MTV Video Music Award for Best Female Video, a historic and chaotic night that inadvertently thrust her into the absolute center of the global pop culture conversation. Yet, amidst the massive radio hits and the global charting success, the true emotional weight of the Fearless album remained anchored in its deeply introspective, quiet moments. The track 15 was a tender, cautionary look back at her early high school years, written specifically for her real-life best friend Abigail. The song explored the vulnerable, fragile reality of giving your heart away to a boy who changes his mind, and the comforting, mature realization that your mistakes at 15 do not permanently define your future. White Horse, a quiet, piano-led ballad that won 2 Grammy Awards, stripped away the glamorous illusions of Hollywood romance, capturing the exact, painful second a person realizes that magic isn't real, and that they are not a princess waiting to be rescued, but a real person who has to heal on their own terms. The creative process behind Fearless was a testament to Taylor's relentless work ethic. She wrote many of the tracks while on the road, opening for major country acts on a grueling tour schedule. She would record vocal takes in makeshift studios set up in hotel rooms, balancing the exhausting demands of a rising career with the natural emotional turbulence of an 18-year-old girl. Tracks like Forever and Always were added to the album at the absolute last minute, written in a burst of raw, unfiltered emotion, following a highly publicized breakup that occurred over a 25-second phone call. The track featured aggressive acoustic strumming and dramatic strings, showcasing her ability to turn immediate, personal pain into a powerful, anthemic piece of art. The era culminated in the grand scale of the Fearless Tour, her very first headlining stadium and arena tour, which ran from April of 2009 to July of 2010. On stage, Taylor brought the emotional landscapes of her songs to life with stunning theatricality. The shows featured an iconic moment where a curtain of golden, sparkling water would cascade from the rafters during the performance of Fearless, mirroring the golden aesthetic of the album cover, dressed in sparkling fringed dresses that shifted with every movement, strumming a silver rhinestone-encrusted acoustic guitar. She connected with audiences on a deeply intimate level, often walking through the crowds to hug fans. It was during this era that the tradition of painting the lucky number 13 on the back of her hand began, a symbol of grounding herself amidst the whirlwind of global fame. Breathe in slowly now, letting the warm, golden lights of the Fearless era fill your mind with a deep sense of comfort. This is now the Red era, an intensive, beautifully fractured mosaic of heartbreak, deep self-discovery, and daring sonic experimentation that spanned from 2012 to 2014. To understand the transition into this brilliant era, we must look at where Taylor stood artistically after completing her entirely self-written album, Speak Now. She had proven to the entire music industry that she possessed the unparalleled ability to craft a highly cohesive, record-breaking album completely on her own. Yet, instead of repeating that successful formula, or remaining safely within the comfortable, familiar boundaries of Nashville country pop. A 22-year-old Taylor felt an intense, burning desire for radical reinvention. She realized that staying in one place creatively was the greatest threat to her longevity as an artist. She wanted to stretch her musical boundaries, push her vocals to new heights, and learn from entirely different corners of the musical world. Taylor famously described the overarching emotional landscape of this period as a direct reflection of the intense, chaotic, and volatile relationships she was experiencing in her early 20s. To her, these complex emotions were not sweet, gentle, or melancholic. They were toxic, deeply turbulent, and burning red, to mirror that internal psychological chaos through sound. She made the conscious, high-stakes decision to seek out a diverse group of new creative collaborators, intentionally breaking away from the singular country production that had characterized her early career. She reached out to pop music visionaries Max Martin and Shellback in Sweden, wanting to dissect how they managed to craft such massive, structurally flawless pop hooks and driving, unforgettable bass lines. This artistic leap of faith signaled the true, official beginning of her transition toward global pop dominance. When the album was officially released on October 22, 2012, it shattered commercial expectations and caused massive waves across the industry. Red debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 chart, selling an astonishing 1.21 million copies in its first week in the United States alone. This massive debut marked the largest first-week sales for any album in over a decade, and made Taylor the first country act to achieve such a historic opening week footprint. With Red, she also earned a historic distinction by becoming the first musical artist since the Beatles to have 3 consecutive studio albums remain at the #1 spot for more than 6 weeks each. Despite its massive commercial triumph, the album initially divided traditional music critics. Some viewed the eclectic blend of genres as sonically inconsistent, while others praised it as a brave, genre-defying masterclass in songwriting that exposed the raw, messy complexities of human relationships. The sonic diversity of Red was incredibly vast, functioning as a beautiful bridge between 2 distinct musical worlds. The first half of the record introduced listeners to a sleek, modern pop sound that incorporated heavy electronic synths, processed vocals, and pulsing, hip-hop-influenced bass drums. Working with Max Martin and Shellback, Taylor created the infectious, punchy rhythm of We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, a sarcastic, driving anthem that became her first absolute #1 hit on the global Billboard Hot 100 chart. The trio also pushed creative boundaries with I Knew You Were Trouble, a track that stunned traditional country listeners by incorporating a massive, bass-heavy dubstep drop directly into a story about the profound frustration of loving someone who you knew was dangerous from the very first moment. Yet, sitting perfectly alongside these explosive pop tracks were deeply traditional country ballads and soaring arena rock anthems proved her narrative core remained completely intact. State of Grace opened the album with a thunderous, driving drum beat and sweeping, cavernous guitars inspired by 1980s alternative rock, setting a grand, cinematic tone of epic romantic stakes. Holy Ground brought a frantic, fast-paced, and joyful acoustic energy to a story about looking back at a past relationship with appreciation rather than bitterness. Meanwhile, quiet, slow-burning tracks like I Almost Do and Sad, Beautiful, Tragic maintained a soft, melancholic country folk rock foundation, utilizing gentle acoustic guitars and weeping steel strings to explore the lingering, quiet ache of total isolation and fatting romance. The absolute emotional anchor and undisputed masterpiece of the Red Era was All Too Well, a song that would grow over the years to be widely regarded as the finest piece of songwriting in her entire legendary discography. The track was originally conceptualized completely by accident during a routine tour rehearsal for the Speak Now tour. Taylor was feeling incredibly broken, emotionally exhausted, and unable to focus on her scheduled rehearsals. She walked up to her band, began strumming a repetitive, melancholic guitar chord progression, and started ad-libbing raw lines about a forgotten scarf, a cold autumn walk, and a love that had shattered entirely. Her band intuitively joined in, and they jammed together for over 10 unedited minutes, capturing an unfiltered, devastating wave of immediate grief. Recognizing the undeniable magic of that improvised rehearsal session, Taylor took the raw recording and sought out her trusted, longtime Nashville curator, Liz Rose, to help her edit the sprawling 10-minute draft down into a compact 5.5-minute album track. The resulting song became an absolute masterclass in vivid, cinematic storytelling, painting unforgettable, specific pictures of leaving a scarf at a sister's house, running red lights, and dancing helplessly in the refrigerator light. The song builds with a desperate, crushing patience until it reaches a soaring, legendary bridge where her vocals break with raw emotion, capturing the exact, acute agony of remembering a relationship perfectly when the other person has completely forgotten it. It proved definitively that her ability to capture the deepest depths of human heartbreak remained completely unmatched, regardless of the musical production surrounding it. The collaborative spirit of the Red Era extended far beyond the pop studios of Sweden. Taylor traveled across continents to work with unique artists who brought entirely different textures to the record. She collaborated with the English singer-songwriter Ed Sheeran, who was just beginning his rise to global fame. Together, sitting on a backyard trampoline, they co-wrote Everything Has Changed, a tender, acoustic folk pop duet that captured the sudden, quiet moment your entire perspective shifts after meeting someone new. She also reached out to Gary Lightbody, the lead vocalist of the Irish-Scottish rock band Snow Patrol, to create The Last Time. Produced by Jackknife Lee, this dark, orchestral rock ballad featured heavy, swelling strings and a tense, slow-building vocal duet that perfectly mirrored the exhausting, cyclical argument of a relationship on the absolute brink of total collapse. Behind the scenes, the physical aesthetic of the Red Era was deeply stylized, retro-inspired, and effortlessly autumnal. Taylor completely transformed her public look, adopting a timeless 1950s hipster charm that favored high-waisted shorts, vintage dresses, striped tops, lace-up Oxfords, and a signature bright red lipstick that became her permanent trademark. The album's striking cover art, shot by photographer Sarah Barlow, featured Taylor looking quietly downward, her eyes completely shadowed by the brim of a vintage hat. This visual composition was a direct, intentional homage to the iconic cover art of Joni Mitchell's legendary 1971 album, Blue. Taylor revealed that she had listened to Blue obsessively during the writing process of Red, deeply inspired by how Mitchell fearlessly explored the absolute deepest, most vulnerable corners of her own soul without any regard for public expectation. To support the massive success of the record, she embarked on the spectacular Red Tour, which commenced on March 13, 2013, in Omaha, Nebraska, and ran through June 12, 2014, concluding with a series of massive shows across Asia, encompassing 86 performances across 12 different countries on 4 continents. The tour played to over 1.7 million ecstatic fans and grossed more than $150 million, officially becoming the highest grossing tour by a country artist in music history at that time. The live performances were grand, highly theatrical spectacles divided into distinct acts that traced an emotional arc from high-energy pop exuberance to deeply intimate acoustic reflection. The stage production incorporated intricate circus elements, featuring an iconic opening number where Taylor would appear silhouetted behind a massive red curtain, dressed as an elaborate circus ringleader in a custom tailcoat and boots to lead her audience into the show. During the 2-hour concerts, the stage would transform completely for each song. For All Too Well, the massive screens would dim, the elaborate dancers would exit, and Taylor would walk alone to a glossy red grand piano in the center of the stadium stage. Sitting under a single, sharp spotlight, she would deliver a raw, emotionally bruising performance that left entire stadiums in absolute silence, proving that the heart of her artistry always remained in the simple, vulnerable connection between a lyric and a listener. The tour also served as a major launching pad for Ed Sheeran, who performed as the primary opening act for the entire North American leg, joining Taylor on stage each night to perform their acoustic duet under a canopy of warm lights. The Red Era was a profound, necessary turning point in her life, a beautiful and chaotic bridge that allowed her to outgrow the strict confines of a single musical genre. The critical conversations and industry debates surrounding the album's mixed country and pop identity ultimately gave her the clarity and the fierce confidence she needed to plan her next monumental move. She realized that she was ready to fully step into the sunlight of the global pop industry. This is now the 1989 era, a blindingly bright, highly calculated, and culturally dominant chapter that spanned from 2014 to 2016. To understand the gravity of this era, we must look at the exact moment of its conception. Following the release of Red, Taylor had received a nomination for Album of the Year at the Grammy Awards. When she did not win, she went home that night with a fierce, quiet clarity. She realized that the sonic experimentation of her previous record, mixing country storytelling with electronic pop, had created a brilliant but structurally divided piece of art. The Recording Academy and the music industry wanted a clear identity. Taylor decided right then that if she was going to cross over into pop music, she would not dip her toes into the water. She would dive completely into the deep end. She set out to create what she formally termed her very first official, documented, and sonically cohesive pop album. Her first step was a radical transformation of her entire environment and lifestyle. In early 2014, Taylor made a highly publicized move to New York City, purchasing a sprawling, beautiful loft in the historic neighborhood of Tribeca. She cut her signature long, curly blonde hair into a sharp, sleek, and modern bob, completely shedding the bohemian, small-town country imagery that had defined her youth. New York became a living, breathing character in her songwriting, representing an intoxicating sense of absolute freedom, reinvention, and independence. She stepped into a fast-paced world of high fashion, city lights, and constant media attention, intentionally surrounding herself with a tight-knit circle of female friends, models, and artists. The visual landscape of this era shifted entirely away from the rustic, autumnal textures of her past and embraced a bright, minimalist, and retro-inspired 1980s urban aesthetic. Musically, the album was named 1989 as a direct homage to her birth year. But more importantly, it was an intentional artistic nod to the creative philosophy of the late 1980s pop music scene. Taylor was deeply inspired by a period in music history when artists were taking massive, bold risks with early synthesizers, creating pop tracks that were incredibly clean, atmospheric, and driven by minimalist production rather than overlayered instrumentals. To capture this specific, nostalgic essence, she enlisted the absolute masters of modern pop production, Max Martin and Shellback, appointing Martin as her official co-executive producer for the entire project. She also deepened her creative partnership with Jack Antonoff, who brought a unique, alternative, and analog, synth-heavy perspective to the writing sessions, constructing musical soundscapes that felt both entirely modern and beautifully nostalgic. When the album was officially released on October 27, 2014, it triggered an absolute commercial explosion that shook the foundations of the modern music industry. During a time when album sales were severely declining worldwide due to the rapid rise of digital streaming platforms, 1989 defied all economic logic. The album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart, selling an astronomical 1.287 million copies in its very first week in the United States alone. This massive achievement made Taylor the first and only musical artist in history to have 3 separate studio albums sell over 1 million copies in a single week. The record spent a staggering 11 non-consecutive weeks at the absolute summit of the charts, eventually spawning 3 separate number 1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100, and remaining in the top 10 for an entire year, cementing its status as an absolute commercial juggernaut. The leading singles from 1989 were inescapable cultural anthems that dominated global radio airwaves for months on end. The lead single, Shake It Off, was a bright, brassy, and incredibly infectious track designed to address the relentless media scrutiny, romantic rumors, and public criticism surrounding her life with a sense of playful, high-energy defiance. Blank Space took that self-referential satire even further, with Taylor deliberately and brilliantly writing a song entirely from the perspective of the erratic, dramatic, and boy-crazy character that the tabloid media had constructed around her public persona. The track was a dark pop masterpiece of sharp lyricism and driving electronic beats, accompanied by a cinematic music video that became a viral sensation, showcasing her sharp wit and her uncanny ability to laugh at her own public image. Beneath the massive, chart-topping radio singles, the 1989 album offered deeply atmospheric, emotional, and textured pop tracks that captured the frantic, fast-paced rhythm of her new life. Style layered a late-night, driving atmosphere over a funk-inspired guitar riff and a pulsing synth bass line, creating a timeless, cinematic song about a cyclical romance that never truly goes out of fashion. Out of the Woods, co-written with Jack Antonoff, used heavy, repetitive, and anxiety-inducing choruses layered over massive, booming electronic drum beats to perfectly mirror the fragile, frantic, and unstable nature of a relationship that was constantly on the verge of collapsing under the weight of external pressures and public eyes. The emotional depth of the era was further anchored by tracks like Clean and Wildest Dreams. Clean, the triumphant closing track of the standard album, was co-written and produced in London with the acclaimed British electronic artist Imogen Heap, built around unique, floating instruments like the mbira and the boomwhacker. The song served as a gorgeous, metaphorical exploration of finally washing away the lingering pain of a toxic relationship, comparing the process of healing to a heavy rainstorm that leaves a person entirely renewed. Wildest Dreams emerged as a sweeping, dramatic dream pop ballad that incorporated the real recording of Taylor's own heartbeat as the central, pulsing drum beat of the track, creating an incredibly intimate, melancholic atmosphere about a romance that is destined to end from the very start. The monumental success of the record culminated at the 58th Annual Grammy Awards, a historic night that solidified her legacy as an absolute pop titan. 1989 won 3 Grammy Awards, including Best Pop Vocal Album and the highly coveted, prestigious trophy for Album of the Year. With this historic win, Taylor became the first solo female artist in the entire history of music to win Album of the Year twice for 2 completely different musical genres, bridging the worlds of country and pop in a way no artist had ever achieved before. In her acceptance speech, she delivered a powerful, widely celebrated message aimed directly at young women everywhere, urging them to stay entirely focused on their own hard work, protect their creative integrity, and never let anyone else take credit for their success or their impact. To support the massive global footprint of the record, she embarked on the spectacular 1989 World Tour, which ran from May to December of 2015, playing to sold-out stadiums across North America, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. Grossing over $250 million, it officially became the highest-grossing tour of the entire year and her most commercially successful live venture to date. The stage production was a massive, sleek, and high-tech spectacle featuring a rotating 24-meter-long catwalk that lifted Taylor high into the air above the roaring stadium crowds. Dressed in glittering, color-changing LED jackets, metallic skirts, and sleek crop tops, she commanded the massive spaces with absolute confidence, accompanied by an elite team of 12 male backing dancers and a thunderous live band. A defining characteristic of the 1989 World Tour was its unprecedented element of surprise. Every single night of the tour, Taylor would invite surprise celebrity guests, legendary musicians, and cultural icons onto the stage to perform duets or walk the catwalk alongside her. Audiences were treated to historic, unannounced appearances by artists ranging from Mick Jagger and Steven Tyler to Alanis Morissette, Mary J. Blige, and Justin Timberlake, alongside icons from the worlds of sports and fashion. This nightly spectacle turned every stadium concert into a massive, highly anticipated cultural event that dominated social media feeds globally, perfectly reflecting the absolute height of her influence, her massive celebrity reach, and her undisputed status as the central figure of the global pop landscape. Yet behind the dazzling neon lights, the booming pop choruses, and the exhausting whirlwind of global fame, the 1989 era was a profound testament to an artist who possessed the rare, fearless vision to completely dismantle her own successful foundation and rebuild it from scratch on her own terms. She had taken the ultimate career gamble and won completely, permanently changing the boundaries of what a modern musical artist could achieve across different genres. Breathe in slowly now, letting the bright, pulsing neon lights of the 1989 era soften into a gentle, soothing glow in your mind. Feel the cool, quiet peace of the evening settle over you, like the calm after a magnificent, driving rainstorm in the heart of the city. Following a year of complete, unprecedented isolation from the public eye, the world awoke to an absolute blackout of all social media channels. Every profile picture, tweet, and Instagram post was completely erased, leaving a stark, eerie digital void. In their place, a series of short, unannounced, and cryptic videos began to emerge, glitchy, low-quality footage of a striking, coiling snake. It was a calculated, brilliant reclamation of a visual symbol that had been used by millions of detractors to tear down her character during a massive, weaponized media storm. This dark, protective shadow marked the official, defiant beginning of the Reputation era, which spanned from 2017 to 2018. It stood as a towering, industrial fortress of sonic vengeance, public exile, and the fierce preservation of private love amidst total cultural chaos. Musically and conceptually, the album was a complete departure from the pristine, neon-lit pop perfection of its predecessor. Taylor retreated into the studio with Jack Antonoff, Max Martin, and Shellback to construct a heavy, aggressive soundscape dominated by dark electronic synths, deep industrial bass drops, trap-influenced drum beats, and heavily manipulated, distorted vocal layering. Released on November 10, 2017, the album deliberately offered no traditional press interviews, no magazine covers, and no public explanations, accompanied by the iconic, defining tagline, "There will be no explanation. There will only be reputation," despite the complete absence of traditional promotion. The record shattered industry standards, debuting at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart and selling 1.216 million copies in its first week, making Taylor the only artist in history to have 4 separate albums sell over 1 million copies in a single week. The lead single, "Look What You Made Me Do," shook the entire music industry to its core. Built around a cold, menacing beat and a spoken word chorus, the track was an unapologetic, sharp response to the media narratives and industry figures who had attempted to orchestrate her public downfall. The accompanying music video was a masterpiece of dark satire and self-reference, featuring a literal mountain of past versions of herself, from the innocent, curly-haired country girl to the glittering pop titan, all clawing at each other to reach the top. It culminated in a viral phone call skit where Taylor famously declared that the old Taylor couldn't come to the phone right now because she was dead, officially laying past personas to rest and embracing a new, unbreakable armor. Yet, if listeners chose to look past the booming bass, the heavy newsprint aesthetic, and the theatrical venom of the first half of the album, they discovered that the true, beating heart of the record was intensely romantic and vulnerable. Reputation was, at its core, a deeply tender love story wrapped inside a protective shell. It chronicled the exact, fragile moment you fall in love with someone when your entire public life has fallen apart, and you have to rebuild a quiet, secret existence from scratch. Tracks like Delicate used soft, vocoder vocal elements to capture the terrifying insecurity of early romance, asking softly if a person still cares about you despite reading the worst possible things about your character in the press. This beautiful duality between public warfare and private peace ran through the absolute entirety of the track list. Don't Blame Me emerged as a sweeping, dark gospel pop masterpiece, comparing the obsessive, saving nature of real love to an absolute addiction, built around soaring vocal runs that pushed her range to dramatic new heights. King of My Heart and Call It What You Want celebrated the profound, quiet relief of walking away from the plastic, performative noise of high society to build an unshakable, protected life with someone who loves you for exactly who you are, far away from the flashing lights of the paparazzi cameras. The era was visually characterized by an intense, dark color palette dominated by blacks, deep emerald greens, camo patterns, heavy leather boots, and industrial chains. This aesthetic was brought to life on a historic scale during the Reputation Stadium tour, which ran from May to November of 2018, encompassing 53 massive, sold-out dates across North America, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. The tour shattered economic records to become the highest-grossing tour in United States history at that time, bringing in over $345 million. The stage production was an architectural marvel, featuring an 110-foot tall main stage that split apart into a massive X shape, flanked by towering 20-foot tall mechanical snakes that exhaled real bursts of fire into the stadium air. Despite the imposing, aggressive scale of the stadium setup, Taylor designed the live show to maintain an intimate connection with her audience. During the concerts, she would fly across the stadium in a golden, illuminated cage to perform on two smaller B stages located deep within the crowds, close enough to look her fans directly in the eyes. In a beautiful moment that occurred every single night, the massive electronic instruments would fall silent, the dancers would leave the stage, and Taylor would stand completely alone with a simple acoustic guitar, or sit at a glossy piano to deliver a raw, unproduced performance of a surprise song from her past catalog, proving that the unbreakable bond between her lyrics and her fans could survive any storm. The album closed with New Year's Day, a quiet, acoustic piano ballad that stood in stark, beautiful contrast to the heavy electronic production of the rest of the record. The song captured the absolute essence of true, enduring companionship, focusing not on the person who dances with you at the midnight party amidst the glitter and the music, but on the person who stays behind with you the next morning to quietly help you clean up the bottles and the mess. It was a profound statement of survival, resilience, and growth, proving that she had managed to protect the most sacred parts of her humanity while navigating the most hostile public environment imaginable. The heavy, dark armor of public exile dissolved completely into a radiant, pastel-hued spring with the arrival of the Lover era, which spanned from 2019 to early 2020. This chapter represented a vibrant, celebratory return to the bright warmth of the sunlight, capturing an artist stepping out of the fortress she had built and learning to live with an open, undefended heart once again. The visual aesthetic shifted dramatically away from dark leathers, heavy industrial chains, and black and white newsprint, embracing instead a dreamy, soft world of pinks, blues, and purples set against skis, filled with rainbows and cotton candy clouds. It was an era defined by absolute freedom, deep self-acceptance, and a mature exploration of love in all its beautiful, multifaceted forms, whether romantic, platonic, familial, or political. Musically, Lover was a sprawling, diverse pop landscape consisting of 18 tracks, making it her longest standard studio album up to that point. Taylor reunited with Jack Antonoff to craft a sound that felt incredibly intimate, yet vastly melodic, blending bright synth pop, retro waltzes, acoustic ballads, and driving indie pop rhythms. Released on August 23, 2019, Lover achieved immense global commercial success, debuting at #1 on the Billboard 200 chart and selling over 867,000 copies in its first week in the United States alone. It became the top-selling album of the year globally, proving that her transition back into bright pop spaces was met with absolute enthusiasm by fans and critics alike, who praised the record's emotional warmth and lyrical maturity. The title track, Lover, emerged as a beautiful, timeless return to her classic romantic songwriting roots. Written entirely by Taylor on a midnight piano in her home, the song featured an enchanting, retro-style 3/4 waltz rhythm, warm acoustic strums, and a classic, reverb-heavy snare drum that evoked a sense of nostalgic permanence. The lyrics felt like a sacred set of wedding vows, celebrating the quiet, everyday joy of leaving the festive string lights up until January and building a cozy, permanent life with a trusted partner. The track was widely hailed by critics as a songwriting masterpiece, perfectly capturing the transition from the frantic, insecure infatuation of youth into the calm, unshakable peace of long-term companionship. In stark contrast to the quiet intimacy of the title track, Cruel Summer stood out as a massive, glittering pillar of modern pop perfection. Co-written with Jack Antonoff and the alternative rock artist St. Vincent, the track was a desperate, high-energy exploration of the agonizing tension, secrecy, and vulnerability of a fragile summer romance built on unstable ground. The song was characterized by shimmering electronic synthesizers, a pulsing bass line, and a ferocious, soaring vocal bridge that demanded to be sung aloud. Although it was not initially pushed as a radio single during the album's release, track remained a profound fan favorite for years, eventually rising organically to dominate global streaming charts and reaching number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 long after its release, cementing its status as an absolute classic. The Lover era also marked a massive, historic turning point in Taylor's career regarding artistic ownership, corporate autonomy, and systemic advocacy within the music industry. This was her very first studio album recorded under her brand new contract with Republic Records and Universal Music Group. This groundbreaking deal not only guaranteed that she would completely and permanently own the master recordings of all her future music, but it also included a unique provision stating that any sale of Universal's shares in Spotify would result in a direct, non-recoupable distribution of money to all artists on their roster. This monumental move solidified her status not just as a dominant pop star, but as a fierce, systemic advocate for creators' rights, forever changing the power dynamics between artists and major record corporations. Behind the scenes, the creative process for Lover was characterized by a sense of absolute creative freedom and unhurried experimentation. Much of the album was recorded in pleasant, relaxed environments, including Electric Lady Studios in New York City. Tracks like The Archer, co-written with Jack Antonoff, stripped away the massive pop hooks to offer a dark, minimalist, and deeply introspective synth ballad that explored her deepest internal anxieties, her fear of betrayal, and the complex psychological toll of living a life hyperanalyzed by the public eye. Meanwhile, songs like Cornelia Street used a driving electronic beat and delicate piano chords to map out the geography of memory, capturing the terrifying fear that a future heartbreak could permanently ruin a beautiful place you once shared with someone. The visual storytelling of the era was incredibly rich and highly stylized, brought to life through a series of cinematic music videos directed or co-directed by Taylor herself. The video, for me, introduced the era with a literal explosion of pastel color, opening with a French-speaking snake that bursts into a cloud of beautiful butterflies, signaling the definitive end of the dark Reputation themes. The man took her visual commentary even further, featuring Taylor undergoing hours of intense prosthetic makeup to transform completely into a wealthy, entitled male executive. The video served as a brilliant, sharp satirical take on the double standards, sexism, and unearned privileges that women face in corporate and creative industries, showcasing her sharp directorial vision. While Taylor had initially planned a unique, festival-style concert experience titled Lover Fest to support the album, the global events of early 2020 ultimately prevented the tour from taking place. Despite the absence of a traditional stadium trek, the era left an indelible mark on culture as a time of profound healing, artistic liberation, and vibrant joy. It was the definitive sound of a person who had fought through a dark night of the soul and arrived safely on the other side, fully realizing that she did not have to be defined by the battle she fought, but by the things that she loved. Then, when the entire world quieted down in the unexpected, solitary summer of 2020, Taylor surprised the global music community by retreating deep into an imaginary, moss-covered wilderness without any of the traditional industry promotion, radio rollouts, or warning. She suddenly announced and dropped her 8th studio album, Folklore. This masterpiece departed completely from her traditional style of autobiographical, stadium-sized pop songwriting, embracing instead a rustic, minimalist world of intricate, fictional storytelling, historical myth, and deep introspection. It became the ultimate artistic companion piece for a world experiencing unprecedented isolation, uncertainty, and quiet contemplation, shifting the entire cultural landscape overnight. The musical architecture of Folklore was crafted entirely in secret during the global lockdown, with collaborators working thousands of miles apart from their respective home studios. Taylor reached out to Aaron Dissner, the multi-instrumentalist and producer from the acclaimed indie rock band The National, whose dark, melancholic, and textured acoustic compositions she had long admired. Together, alongside her longtime creative partner Jack Antonoff, they built a rich, organic sonic universe. The massive pop synthesizers and explosive radio hooks of her previous eras were completely replaced by delicate finger-picked acoustic guitars, soft felt pianos, sweeping orchestral strings, cellos, and deeply poetic, dense prose that read like classic literature. Upon its release on July 24, 2020, Folklore was met with an immediate wave of universal critical acclaim, with reviewers hailing it as a songwriting triumph and the definitive artistic statement of the pandemic era. Commercially, it defied the quiet nature of its release, debuting at #1 on the Billboard 200 chart and selling over 846,000 copies in its first week in the United States alone. The album established Taylor as the first artist in history to have 7 different albums debut, with over 500,000 copies sold in a single week. It spent 8 weeks at the absolute summit of the charts and went on to win the prestigious trophy for Album of the Year at the 63rd Annual Grammy Awards, making her the first solo female artist in the entire history of music to win the industry's highest honor 3 times. The narrative heart of Folklore was anchored by a brilliant, interconnected lyrical trilogy that tracked a complicated, messy teenage love triangle from 3 entirely different perspectives across 3 distinct tracks: Cardigan, Betty, and Auguste. Cardigan, written from the perspective of a woman looking back on the sharp pains of her youth, used the haunting imagery of an old, vintage sweater tucked under a bed to explore the comfort and eventual betrayal of a first love. Betty stripped the production down to a bouncy acoustic guitar and a rustic harmonica, capturing the raw, clumsy, and naive apology of a 17-year-old boy standing on a front porch, Meanwhile, August emerged as a shimmering, melancholic dream pop masterpiece, capturing the aching, breathless grief of the unnamed girl who spent her summer loving a boy who was never truly hers to keep. Beneath the teenage love triangle, the album dived into deeply complex historical and psychological territories. The last great American dynasty showcased her incredible ability to weave biographical history into music, telling the eccentric, fascinating life story of Rebecca Harkness, the wealthy socialite who had previously owned Taylor's historic holiday home in Rhode Island. Taylor brilliantly drew a parallel between the public scrutiny Rebecca faced for her unconventional lifestyle and the media storm surrounding her own modern life. My Tears Ricochet, a devastating, cinematic ballad that served as the album's emotional track 5, used the dark Gothic metaphor of a ghost attending its own funeral to explore the profound pain of an agonizing professional and personal betrayal. The isolation of the era allowed Taylor to collaborate with artists outside her usual sphere, most notably the indie folk project Bon Iver, led by Justin Vernon. Their haunting duet, Exile, became one of the most celebrated tracks on the record, utilizing a heavy, repeating piano chord to frame a tense, heartbreaking conversation between two former lovers who completely miscommunicated throughout their entire relationship. The stark contrast between Vernon's deep, rumbling baritone and Taylor's soft, breathless vocals perfectly captured the tragic reality of two people looking at the exact same breakup through completely different lenses, unable to find a common language. Visually, the folklore era was defined by a raw, unpolished, and completely natural aesthetic. The album cover, shot by photographer Bate Garabrandt on a simple black and white film camera, featured Taylor standing small and isolated amidst a forest of towering, misty pine trees in upstate New York, wearing an oversized plaid coat with her hair tied back in two messy buns. There were no bright colors, no high-fashion costumes, and no heavily staged productions. This minimalist approach extended to the Disney Plus cinematic concert film, Folklore, the Long Pond studio sessions, where Taylor, Aaron Dessner, and Jack Antonoff gathered in person for the very first time in a cozy, rustic cabin to play through the album live from start to finish, sharing the quiet stories behind the creation of each song. Folklore was a profound testament to an artist whose talent could not be contained or defined by the glitz and glamour of pop stardom. It proved that at the absolute center of her global influence lay a simple, pure, and undeniable gift for storytelling that could command the world's attention even from the quietest corners of a forest. Just as the world settled into the quiet, moss-covered woods of her previous creation, the twilight deepened, and less than 5 months later, she surprised the global music community once again by dropping a second alternative folk masterpiece, Evermore. Released on December 11, 2020, she described this project not as a separate departure, but as a direct, seamless continuation of the rich storytelling world she had discovered over the summer. In her own words, she and her collaborators simply could not stop writing songs, feeling as though they were standing on the edge of the Folklorian woods, and had a choice to either turn back or travel further into the rich, untamed forest of their imagination. They chose to walk deeper into the trees, crafting an album that was structurally darker, more experimental, and deeply anchored in complex human narratives. The musical architecture of Evermore reunited the brilliant creative trio of Taylor, Aaron DeSnur, and Jack Antonoff, pushing the organic, acoustic boundaries of their previous work into daring new territories. While Folklore felt like a misty, midsummer morning, Evermore was an explicitly wintry, late-night journey, built upon intricate, fast-paced, finger-picked guitars, dark grand pianos, experimental time signatures, and lush orchestral arrangements. Commercially, the record mirrored the monumental success of its sister album, debuting at #1 on the Billboard 200 chart, and making Taylor the first artist since the Beatles to achieve 2 separate chart-topping albums in such a short span of time. It solidified her absolute dominance over the streaming era, while earning universal critical praise for its lyrical complexity and sonic depth. The narrative threads of Evermore focused heavily on themes of complex marriages, long-term commitment, domestic secrets, and the heavy, lingering ghosts of unfulfilled love. Willow, the enchanting lead single, opened the album with a hypnotic, winding acoustic guitar riff, using the natural metaphor of a willow branch bending in the wind to explore the fluid, intoxicating nature of desire and fate. In stark contrast, Champagne Problems emerged as a devastating, piano-led masterpiece, tracking the precise, painful seconds of a Christmas Eve marriage proposal that goes completely wrong. The song was a masterclass in psychological vividness, capturing the quiet heartbreak of a young woman dealing with mental health struggles while having to turn down a perfect, well-meaning partner in front of a room full of celebrating family. The album dived deeper into experimental character studies with tracks like Toll, a dark, cinematic folk ballad written in a rare 5/4 time signature. The song told the haunting story of a woman trapped in a cold, loveless marriage, wandering through a grand country estate while dreaming of a dark, forbidden romance, built around a tense, slow-burning arrangement of acoustic plucking and dramatic strings. Happiness offered a profoundly mature, deeply empathetic look at the complicated aftermath of a long-term divorce, acknowledging that while there is immense pain and anger right now, there was a beautiful happiness in the past, and there will be a brand new happiness in the future, showcasing a level of emotional nuance that stunned critics. The collaborative spirit of the era expanded to include distinct voices from the alternative rock and indie folk worlds. She collaborated with the acclaimed rock band HAIM to create No Body, No Crime, a dark, brilliant country mystery track inspired by classic Appalachian murder ballads. The song used heavy harmonicas and driving guitars to tell a fictional story about a woman seeking ultimate justice for her missing friend, demonstrating Taylor's enduring love for traditional, plot-driven country storytelling. Coney Island emerged as a melancholic, widescreen indie rock duet with the lead vocalist of The National, Matt Berninger, using the imagery of a cold, abandoned amusement park to map out the heavy, lingering regrets of a relationship that slowly fell apart due to emotional neglect. The absolute emotional anchor and biographical core of the record lay within the moving track Marjorie, widely considered one of the most hauntingly beautiful pieces in her entire discography. The song served as a tender, deeply personal tribute to her late maternal grandmother, Marjorie Finlay, who had been an accomplished professional opera singer. The lyrics explored the heavy, universal grief of realizing you were too young to ask your grandparents the right questions before they passed away, wishing you could listen to their wisdom just one more time. In a moment of breathtaking artistic brilliance, Taylor wove old, polished audio recordings of her grandmother's real operatic backing vocals directly into the track's swelling climax, allowing their voices to harmonize across generations in a beautiful, permanent piece of art. The title track, Evermore, served as the ultimate, triumphant closing statement for the entire twin album era. A sprawling theatrical collaboration with Bon Iver, the song began as a slow, isolated piano ballad that mirrored the heavy, winter-born depression of an endless night. Justin Vernon's frantic, falsetto vocal bridge suddenly breaks into the track like a sudden, chaotic storm, representing the internal panic of a mind trapped in its own dark thoughts. However, as their voices beautifully collide and find a common rhythm, the tempo slows back down to a peaceful, grounded piano, concluding with the comforting, vital realization that the heavy pain a person carries is not permanent, and that the winter will eventually give way to spring. Visually, the Evermore era maintained the rustic, unpolished, and completely natural aesthetic of folklore, but wrapped it in warm, autumnal, and wintry textures. The iconic album cover, shot once again on a simple film camera, featured Taylor from behind, her long blonde hair woven into a single, neat braid, standing at the edge of the woods while wearing a cozy, oversized orange plaid coat. There were no flashing lights, no pop choreography, and no commercial press tour. It was the definitive sound of an artist who had completely transcended the traditional demands of the entertainment industry, finding absolute peace, creative fulfillment, and global reverence by simply trusting the raw power of her own mind. We step back out of the quiet, rustic woods of her folk era and return to the modern pop landscape with the arrival of Midnights, a brilliant concept album detailing 13 sleepless nights scattered throughout various points in her life. Released on October 21, 2022, the record was conceptualized as a late-night, moody journey through self-loathing, romantic fantasies, public expectations, and sleepless contemplation. It captured the exact, quiet thoughts that keep a person packing the floor at 3 o'clock in the morning when the rest of the world is fast asleep. Musically, Taylor reunited with Jack Antonoff to craft a highly specific soundscape built upon subtle, vintage electronic textures, atmospheric pop production, pulsing synthesizers, and heavily distorted vocal effects that perfectly mirrored the hazy, dreamlike nature of late-night reflection. Upon its historic release, Midnights triggered an unprecedented commercial and critical explosion that completely dominated the global music landscape. Taylor achieved a feat never before seen in the entire history of the music industry by claiming the entire top 10 spots of the Billboard Hot 100 chart simultaneously, a complete monopoly of popular music. The album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, achieving the largest streaming week for a pop album in history, and selling over 1.5 million copies in its first week in the United States alone. The era's massive cultural footprint culminated at the 66th Annual Grammy Awards, where Midnights secured the highly coveted trophy for Album of the Year, making Taylor the first and only artist in history to win the industry's highest honor 4 times, breaking a historic tie with music legends. The lead single, Antihero, became an instant global phenomenon and an introspective anthem for millions of listeners worldwide. Taylor described the track as a raw, guided tour through all the specific things she tends to hate about herself, confronting her deepest internal insecurities, anxieties, and fears of alienation with sharp, witty, and unapologetic lyricism built around a driving synth-pop beat and an incredibly infectious melody. The song balanced heavy psychological themes with a playful, self-deprecating chorus that dominated global radio airwaves for months. The accompanying music video, written and directed by Taylor, visually brought her internal nightmares to life, featuring a literal giant version of herself trying to navigate a normal dinner party. The thematic depth of Midnights dived into many different facets of a late-night mind, ranging from dark revenge to sweet romantic security. Maroon emerged as a deeply mature, atmospheric fan favorite, exploring a darker, richer, and far more complex shade of the intense, burning love she had written about a decade prior during her youth, using rich imagery of wine stains and rust over a pulsing bass line. Lavender Haze, which opened the album, utilized a sultry, late-night R&B influenced pop groove to celebrate the desire to stay inside an unshakable, protective romantic glow, completely ignoring the relentless public rumors, societal expectations, and media scrutiny that swirled outside her door. The era also featured moments of sharp, glittering celebration and cinematic storytelling. Bejeweled served as a joyful, high-energy pop anthem that celebrated the act of reclaiming your own sparkle and confidence after a period of being unappreciated or quietly contained. Mastermind closed the standard edition of the album with a brilliant, self-aware lyrical twist, with Taylor playfully confessing to her partner that their seemingly accidental fairy tale romance was actually the result of a highly calculated, meticulously planned strategy, showcasing her sharp wit and her love for intricate design. Meanwhile, You're on Your Own Kid emerged as a devastatingly beautiful track 5, tracing a bittersweet timeline of her entire life, from childhood longing to global fame, culminating in a powerful, reassuring message about finding the resilience to survive your own struggles. The visual aesthetic of the Midnight's era was heavily stylized, retro-inspired, and deeply redolent of the 1970s. The album cover featured a close-up portrait of Taylor holding a lit lighter, her eyes adorned with shimmering blue eyeshadow, captured in a quiet moment of late-night contemplation. Her public fashion shifted to incorporate velvet textures, corduroy trousers, vintage polo shirts, and dark, starry midnight blues. This moody, cinematic imagery carried over into the expansion of the album, known as the 3 a.m. edition, which added 7 bonus tracks co-written with Aaron Dessner. These tracks, including the hauntingly beautiful Would've, Could've, Should've, injected a sharp, alternative rock edge into the electronic pop landscape of the record, exploring the deep, lingering ghosts of past regrets and spiritual growth. The massive momentum of the Midnight's era served as the primary launching pad for the Eras tour. Her historic, career-spanning retrospective stadium trek that commenced in March of 2023. On stage, the Midnight section closed the 3-hour concert with an absolute spectacle of high-tech production and modern dance. The stadium screens would transform into a massive, surreal dreamscape of clouds and ladders, and Taylor would perform in shimmering, midnight blue bodysuits covered in crystals, surrounded by dancers holding massive cloud-like pillows. Performing tracks like Karma and Vigilante Shit with absolute, unmatched confidence, she turned the quiet, sleepless thoughts of a midnight bedroom into a triumphant stadium celebration. The intense, dizzying momentum of her career reached a hyperliterate, raw, and cathartic peak in the spring of 2024 with the arrival of the Tortured Poets Department. Written in absolute secrecy amidst intense personal upheavals and the overwhelming historical height of her global stadium tour, this era emerged as a sprawling, experimental exploration of grief, heartbreak, romantic delusion, and the heavy, exhausting weight of immense public expectation. The album functioned as a poetic, entirely unfiltered autopsy of human heartbreak, wrapped in moody atmospheric synths, sharp indie pop rhythms, and spoken word style vocals that read like modern poetry. Taylor described the project as a lifeline, a necessary collection of songs that captured a fleeting, agonizing period of her life that she needed to write to survive. Upon its historic release on April 19, 2024, The album shattered the absolute ceiling of the modern music industry, completely rewriting the global streaming record books. The Tortured Poets Department became the very first album in history to surpass 1 billion streams on Spotify in a single week, a staggering testament to the world's anticipation. Commercially, it debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 chart, selling an astronomical 2.6 million copies in its first week in the United States alone. In a dazzling display of cultural dominance that mirrored her previous triumphs, Taylor swept the top 14 spots of the Billboard Hot 100 chart simultaneously, just 2 hours after the standard 16-track album dropped. She stunned fans by revealing it was a secret double album, expanding the project into the anthology, a 31-track masterpiece co-written with Aaron Dessner and Jack Antonoff. The lead single, Fortnight, featured a hauntingly beautiful collaboration with Post Malone, setting a melancholic, retro-synth tone for the era. The track used quiet, pulsing electronic beats to explore the quiet agony of an intense, short-lived romance that leaves a person feeling entirely displaced, living as a quiet neighbor to someone they once loved deeply. The accompanying cinematic music video, shot in stark black and white, featured Taylor trapped inside a vintage, surreal asylum, physically attempting to erase the memories of a past love from her mind, perfectly mirroring the psychological themes of containment, recovery, and creative catharsis that defined the entire record. At the absolute conceptual center of this era lay the track I Can Do It with a Broken Heart. The song was a brilliant, devastating piece of pop irony, deliberately juxtaposing an infectious, upbeat, and high-energy electronic dance tempo with deeply tragic lyrics about putting on a sparkling, flawless show for millions of cheering fans while completely falling apart behind the curtains. It pulled back the veil on the immense professionalism and emotional cost required to sustain her level of global stardom, detailing a period where she had to stand on stage in crystal-covered outfits while dealing with immense personal grief, laying the groundwork for a profound artistic evolution. The thematic depth of the double album dived into many different facets of emotional survival and historical parallel. The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived emerged as a slow-building orchestral masterpiece, capturing the raw anger and confusion of a sudden, unexplained abandonment by an unstable partner. The track builds into a thunderous, military-style drumbeat and soaring guitars that feel like a definitive emotional trial. Clara Bow offered a beautifully poignant, widescreen look at the cyclical nature of celebrity culture, tracing a timeline from the legendary silent film actress to Stevie Nicks, and finally to a future young girl being compared to Taylor herself, highlighting the relentless pressure on women in the spotlight. Visually, the era adopted a sophisticated, scholarly, and entirely literary aesthetic. The album imagery was dominated by soft sepias, muted charcoals, typewriters, old manuscripts, and elegant vintage fabrics. Taylor shifted her style to encompass structured coats, Victorian-inspired collars, and a timeless, intellectual elegance. This rich storytelling was seamlessly integrated into her live show, where she introduced an entirely new chapter to the Eras tour dedicated to the album. On stage, the performance was styled like a grand, mid-century theatrical play, featuring a massive, floating bed, dancers dressed as marching band members, and an unforgettable sequence where Taylor was physically forced to perform by her crew, turning her personal trauma into high art. The Tortured Poets Department was the definitive sound of a person using their art to burn away the remaining ghosts of their past, leaving the pain safely recorded within the pages of a notebook. The heavy, black and white ink of the tortured poets dried completely on October 3, 2025, when Taylor pivoted sharply into the theatrical, glittering, and deeply polarizing landscape of the life of a showgirl TLOAS dollar, written in secret during the European leg of the Eras tour. The era served as a high-concept exploration of the ultimate paradox of her existence, living a hyper-visible, glitzy public life on stage, while fiercely protecting an exuberant, private world behind the velvet curtains, visually discarding the somber sepias of her previous work. This chapter exploded into a vibrant, neon orange aesthetic filled with Swarovski crystal chainmail dresses, custom feathered headpieces, and a dazzling Las Vegas revue atmosphere. Musically, the album was a high-octane crossover that Taylor described as blending 1989 beats with folklore lyrics, flying back and forth to Sweden between her stadium shows. She reunited with pop architects Max Martin and Shellback to forge a sonic universe defined by heavy synth pop, dance pop rhythms, and sunshine pop melodies. Stripping away the massive, multi-track expansions of her recent history, Taylor strictly confined the standard album to 12 highly calculated tracks. It was a massive commercial juggernaut, shattering economic records by selling over 4 million copies in its debut week, and making her the first artist in history to fill the entire top 12 spots of the Billboard Hot 100 chart simultaneously. The era was introduced by the cinematic lead single, The Fate of Ophelia, a track that masterfully combined tragic, Shakespearean storytelling with an infectious, driving dance beat, co-directed by Swift alongside choreographer Mandy Moore. The music video became a polished visual anchor for the era, depicting Taylor as a showgirl moving seamlessly through different historical theatrical periods. The tracklist balanced this high-energy pop with deeply specific character studies, such as Elizabeth Taylor, a sweeping soft-rock love song that drew close parallels between Taylor's own life under the media microscope and the resilient, glamorous lens through which the screen legend navigated her own fame. Beneath the sparkling, bejeweled production lay a complex undercurrent of artistic fatigue and sharp industry critique. In tracks like Father Figure, Taylor explored the shifting power dynamics of the music industry and her own status as a corporate matriarch, utilizing a sharp key change chorus to assert her autonomy. Meanwhile, tracks like Opalite leaned into a contagiously happy electronic rhythm, using the metaphor of a man-made gemstone to celebrate the intentional act of manufacturing your own joy rather than waiting for it to happen organically. The era was uniquely contextualized by its lack of a traditional press tour. Instead, the announcement was made alongside Travis and Jason Kels on the New Heights podcast, and the album's rollout was accompanied by a theatrical concert film, Taylor Swift, the official release party of a Showgirl. It stood as the definitive portrait of an artist fully embracing the role of the ultimate entertainer, reckoning with the inherent competition, scrutiny, and exhaustion of a life spent center stage, while maintaining absolute control over the music that defines her legacy. I knew it, I knew you. That micro-era exploded onto the scene when mysterious billboards featuring the initials TS, surrounded by 13 cartoon clouds, began appearing globally, sparking endless fan theories. The veil was officially lifted when Taylor announced she had watched an early screening of the film and immediately went home to pen an original track, fulfilling a lifelong dream of writing for characters she had adored since she was 5 years old. Released through Walt Disney Records, the song triggered a massive pop culture earthquake, completely shattering global 24-hour streaming records on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music as the biggest soundtrack debut in history. Musically, the single marks a gorgeous, deeply nostalgic return to her early country roots. Reunited with her longtime collaborator Jack Antonoff, Taylor builds a sonic landscape filled with acoustic guitars, banjos, and crying harmonicas that feel like a warm, comforting coming home. The song is explicitly written around the emotional journey of Jessie, the cowgirl, focusing on the bittersweet heartache of returning home and looking back at her memories with her original owner, Emily. It balances an infectious, happy sunshine pop melody with a poignant exploration of time, holding on to love, and the profound relief of meeting someone again after a long separation. The rollout was executed with absolute military-grade secrecy. The film's VFX team even had to create a decoy version of the movie to hide the track from the majority of the staff and early press screenings, accompanied by a beautifully polished music video on streaming platforms and a physical CD single release featuring exclusive acoustic and piano renditions. This sudden country revival has completely redefined the anticipation for the movie's theatrical release. It stands as a brilliant, heartwarming testament to her ability to weave cinematic nostalgia with a deeply rooted acoustic sound, capturing the absolute essence of what it means to look at a lifelong bond and realize that sometimes you just know.